Hi, everybody. This is just a quick recording to go through the TA notes for next week. I figured everybody could use a break from a Friday afternoon TA meeting. So next week is going to look very similar to this past week in the sense that the students are going to be setting up vials. The things that are different are that you're going to be developing a methods section with them using the same strategy as the introduction section. And then I'd also like you all to talk to your students about the plan for the last few weeks. So I made some notes on here, but we could just go through them very quickly. So you will be collecting larvae in the first and second lab of next week. Those will be used for the vials that are set up during the first two labs. You will not be collecting embryos. I think the last embryo collection, will be on Sunday. I'm going to go in and pull the plates, collect all the embryos, and kill the cages. Because after this week, the students won't be setting up any additional vials. So collect the larvae, and as usual, Gretchen will be bringing irradiated larvae to the lab. So your own larvae will serve as the larvae for the next section. It looks like the production is pretty high again. So if you could just continue to do that through the end of the day on Thursday, we should be able to get everybody's vials filled. There's a required submission for a draft of the method section for their poster. It's due at 10 p.m. on Sunday, April 4th. It was due on the 28th, but I moved it out a week so that you could review it with your students. In the section of the TA notes, I just made a brief outline. This is an idea of how the students can present it. And I made some notes in here about how detailed it has to be. So all of the major details of the experiment have to be included, from embryo collection all the way through to quantification of survival of larvae. But this can be done really, really efficiently. Method sections that are successful, that work really well on posters, tend to have some visual piece to it, like a flow chart. They could even pull pictures from the lecture. So if they go back into the lecture slides, for many weeks, I was going through the procedure and showing pictures of like embryo collection and larvae collection. They can include those images and just bullet point details next to the images. Do have them take a look at posters from previous semesters, because that's going to give them an idea of what this should look like. So here on the TA notes, I made sort of a rough list. This isn't exactly how it needs to be. But one way that you could do it is to do just sort of a brief overview of the major components of any experiment that they would do, just basically an overview of the protocols, and then go into having like a table or something separate that shows, say, experiment 1, which was the high dose experiment, experiment 2, the dosing, experiment 3, which I'll talk about in a minute, which I think they should probably do their compound plus or minus radiation. But that could be a good way to set it up, because my worry is that they're going to have a bunch of tables explaining all of the different doses for every single vial tested, when really what they need to have are the doses tested and how many replicates they had. You can refer them to the Canvas page. I put a link in the TA notes. This is to their Canvas site, the 2171 Canvas site. I think that they've seen this. It's been linked several times in the calendar for them, but I'm noticing that we're getting, there's a little bit less investment at this point, and I completely understand it. But for example, the pre-lab videos, I think, the views have been going down consistently. When I started putting it onto YouTube maybe 4 weeks ago, we had about 60 views out of the 90 students, and now we're down into the 20s. So do try to point them in the right direction. They're not really paying attention very well anymore. But this page on Canvas has all of the details they need, including all of the rubrics. So I don't want them to be blindsided by the grading. You can also show them the grading rubric. Basically, there's a document that they can open that walks them through each component of the poster. And like I said, they should have seen this, but it's possible that they haven't. And for the methods section, in this case, it is a required and graded submission. We'll be using this checklist as the grading rubric. I'm just going to assign points to each category and give them full, partial, or zero credit. For the final poster, which is also graded, all of these pieces, and you'll see it in the document. So for example, this methods piece becomes part of a much larger rubric, but it's duplicated exactly, and they're just going to get graded on it again. So this is fairly low stakes in the grand scheme of things, but it gives them an opportunity to get feedback to improve their grade on the final poster. The students might ask about how much they need to have in the methods, like I said. So they need to have enough detail so that someone else can repeat the experiment. How long it should be really depends on the strategy that they use to fill their poster. So if they, for example, have a large number of experiments, there are a couple of groups who have been really cranking out experiments, they'll have 3 or 4 graphs in the results section. So their methods section is going to have to be a little bit smaller. For other groups that only have, say, 2 experiments run, which is perfectly fine, they might want to expand their methods section to be a little bit more visual, to occupy more real estate on the poster. But in the week after next, we'll be helping them plug all of these pieces together into a poster template in PowerPoint. So I think they'll get a better sense of what it means. For now, we're not considering length as part of the grading. I don't really care how long it is, as long as on the poster it looks balanced and that the poster is full. Also this week, after you do the methods section draft, do that on the board, get them all on the right track, encourage them to make the draft in class. I think they'll have enough time. They should really be focusing on setting up their last experiment and quantifying survival of their vials. So right now, from when they set up their vials, which is like time 0 to quantifying, this is about 12 days. So any vials that they set up on Thursday, say the very last day of setting up vials, those will be ready 12 days from then, which is almost exactly the time when their poster needs to be submitted. So they have enough time to quantify these things. We can even turn up the heat in the incubator and put all of the vials in there to get them to develop a little bit faster. But in any case, this coming week, all of the controls that they set up in that first week are absolutely ready for quantification. I think there are still some stragglers, so those will be clearly marked in their boxes. And again, so the students aren't confused, these are vials that aren't ones that they set up. I just randomly distributed vials for each group to quantify to get some practice before they do their own. As their own vials come up for quantification, Gretchen and I will be going in and marking those vials with tape, and it'll just say quantify. And all of the ones under the tape would need to be quantified that day. They'll be marking on the vials and recording their own controls from even their own experiment sets into the common spreadsheet, which is linked on Canvas pretty much all over the place. But they should still be maintaining their positive and negative controls in that common worksheet, because they'll be using that to determine whether their vials represent hits. They'll maintain the data from their own vials, from their compounds, in their lab notebooks. But they should also note the results of their controls in their lab notebook. It's just that the actual data, those numbers, absolutely have to be in the common spreadsheet so everyone can use the data. It might be useful at this point because I know they understand, at least on paper, how to quantify, how to determine whether a compound is a hit. I think I would at least open up this spreadsheet for everyone to take a look and go through. In the upper right, you can see there are boxes that are auto-calculating mean, standard deviation, plus or minus 2 standard deviations. Draw on the board again that bell curve and indicate on which ends of the bell curve the chemotherapies and the radiation protectors are hanging out. Because they're not, I think typically what happens in this class is that the students understand it conceptually, and then you ask them to actually do it and be responsible for reporting the data, and it kind of breaks their brains a little bit. So it's a new level of independence for them, so they could probably use the review. I also put some slides that are duplicate slides that you may or may not have used earlier in the semester. You can kind of truncate those slides to run them through, again, what a mean is, what a standard deviation is, and why we use the mean plus or minus 2 standard deviations to determine whether we have a hit. And just as a review for you, remember that our DMSO samples were treated with radiation, so the average survival should be about 50%. It looks like on the spreadsheet it's working out to be about 56%. All of the vials, if we bin them by percentage, so if we have like 0 to 10% hanging out in here, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. If we count the number of vials so that the number of vials is on the y-axis, we'll have hopefully a bell curve. And we choose the mean plus or minus 2 standard deviations because that should encompass 95% of all of the samples when the samples are behaving normally. Anything that's hanging out down here lower than the mean minus 2 standard deviations will represent a chemotherapy. Up here, the mean plus 2 standard deviations or greater, this is going to be the radiation protectors. So any percentage, say in this example, it looks like I've drawn this mean minus 2 standard deviations at about 20%. So if their vials have an average survival of 15%, they're going to call that a hit. But if they have an average survival of 35%, that's inside these two brackets, that is not going to be a hit. So do run through it with them. I know that they know it and they'll tell you that they know it, but then they'll look at the numbers and they'll start to get confused because there is variability in the data. The DMSO samples that we have so far in the spreadsheet are suggesting that anything below about 35% is going to look like a hit. And that's good. It's a really relaxed number, so they have a lot of room to identify things that are potentially interesting. They should be averaging their replicates. So they might have a couple of vials, say for the exact same treatment, that are not hits if the vials are considered individually. But what we have to do is average them because none of the vials are going to accurately represent the responses of the entire population. That's why we do the replicates. So please do review this with the students just so they feel more confident going into the data analysis piece of things. And then the vials that they'll be setting up, you may have already had conversations with the students. I've talked to some of the groups. You all are aware if I've spoken with your groups. So I will never have a conversation that I don't communicate to you because I don't want you to come into the lab blindsided by what's happening. But in any case, I have had conversations with groups and they have some really good ideas. I think that if they have a hypothesis and it sounds reasonable and testable, let's do it. Most of the groups aren't going to be thinking on that level. So what we can do is we can give them some ideas. One idea that would be really useful is to have them test the compound in the same experiment with radiation and without radiation alongside radiation by itself. And I'll let you, I know you can read, so you can just run through this text here. It explains the vials that would be set up, and it gives you 2 examples demonstrating how the students would determine whether their compound is acting with radiation in an additive way or a synergistic way. And we can do that by comparing the effect of the compound by itself, the compound with radiation, and radiation by itself. So just read through that on your own, and I think it will be familiar when you read it. If you're going to start getting students worried about their results not coming out good, please try to deter them from using that language. It's kind of a dangerous and slippery slope to be looking at experimental results that don't fit your hypothesis as being bad results, because they're not. Our experiment is extremely well designed. They've done lots of replicates. They're really good at setting up their vials now. So if their compound didn't work, that's okay. That's still a really good result, because it doesn't make any sense to leave these compounds hanging around in the lab as potentially interesting hits when in fact the students this semester determined that they're not. It's an opportunity for us to put that to bed. So you'll have to start answering questions about, what happens if my compound's not a chemotherapy? That's perfectly fine. They're going to report it. And then we can help them talk about how we might continue to look at the compound, or how we might think about using medicinal chemistry, which they've heard about this week and they'll hear more about next week, to see if that compound might actually have some promise, but the structure is a little bit off. So for example, the students may have chosen a compound that looks really good on paper. There are lots of publications showing that this particular compound inhibits cell division. So it should work, but it didn't work. So why didn't it work? Well, perhaps it didn't have access through the digestive system of the larvae. There could be little things about the compound that make it so that the data obtained in cells, in cell culture, those data don't translate into an organism. And it doesn't mean that the compound is bad. It just means that the compound needs to have other properties to make it so that the compound has access to all of the tissues in a whole organism. So we can help the students in their future directions on their poster propose things that would allow them to continue studying the compounds. So none of the compounds chosen this semester are duds. They all looked like they definitely should work. Most of them won't, but we should try to get the students to think about how they cannot be dead in the water, how they can continue to seek funding for a compound even when the first experiments fail. And then finally, it doesn't really matter when you do this, but if you could please do it by the end of the week, talk to the students about the last few weeks of class. I've outlined the remaining tasks. And in a nutshell, the only thing after this week that they have to do is quantify survival. Now, if you were around last semester, it was even crazier last semester with shutting down and opening up again. But what we decided to do is to allow the groups to just have a representative come in and do the quantification, and then to have remote sort of shorter labs. So one way this could work is you could tell the students, look, you have to quantify your vials, but you have 4 people in your group. So what if one person came on Tuesday, a different person came on Thursday, a different person came the following Tuesday, and the 4th person came the following Thursday? In other words, just split up so that each of the members comes to the lab on their given day to quantify vials. And what you can do with the rest of the group, because we still have content to cover in lab, but I think it might be done better remotely, to be honest. You could have like an hour-long lab session. So that, the first hour of your lab is a formal meeting where you teach them how to make a nice bar graph for their poster. You work with them in populating one of the templates. And as an option, they can stay for the second hour to get some more personal help from you, or you can invite me and I'll come and take a look at their data and talk them through stuff. So in that case, it would work if you decide to do that. If the students are like, yeah, I'm kind of all done. I don't really want to have to come to the lab twice a week anymore. Just that'll have to be communicated to us. And what we could do, if enough sections choose that, is we sort of just leave the door open all day and allow students to come in and quantify whenever they want. If it's done such that only a couple of groups want to do that, then we'll probably ask the students to sign up during time slots where there's room in one of the labs. It'll be a little clunkier, but we can definitely do it. I just want to emphasize that I think in the last few weeks of class, I think everybody's really tired. And I mean, I don't know how you all feel, but I feel really beat down from this semester. And I think that if we can make the last few weeks as supportive as possible, in really helping the students have an amazing poster, but not, forcing them to come to the lab and be there for 4 hours a week. And for you too, I think that it's time just to, take a step back, get the things done that we need to get done and get through the semester. But if you could just have that conversation with them, see what ideas they come up with. Gretchen and I can be extremely flexible, and I will support whatever your section decides and we'll make it work. But just please communicate that to me either before Friday, or we could all just see what all the sections are doing in TA meeting. Okay, so I think that's all I have. The lab is looking so great. Oh my gosh, it's looking so good. You guys are doing so well. So thank you for being so incredibly amazing. On that note, I'm going to put out a call for fall TAs, probably, what is it? It's almost April. So probably in the next 3 weeks or so. But every semester, what I like to do, and this is obviously not relevant for graduate students, but for undergrads, I like to give you all first dibs if you want to come back and be a TA in the fall. If you took the fly course, TAing for Salmonella is a lot easier. I know it's for both Delwyn and Ollie who took Salmonella and are TAing for fly. It's been really challenging. But going in the opposite direction, it's a lot easier. So I would be more than happy to have really any of you come back. So just start giving that some thought, because I want to make sure that we get you into sections that you want. I don't have a sense of how many paid positions I'm going to have. Occasionally, I have anywhere from 1 to 4 paid positions, but we can talk about that in the TA meeting. I can give you more details on what that looks like. But again, this isn't urgent. Just give it some thought. And I will see you all next week. Let me know if you want to meet up and talk about things, or if you want me to stop by. The only sections that are really challenging for me are Mondays and Wednesday, the last section, so section 13, because I teach during that time. But that said, I can swing down at the very beginning of class, and I can skip out of my other class for a little bit and come down. Or I can schedule a Zoom session with whatever group you want me to talk to and we can do that really at any time. Okay, so have a great weekend. And if I don't hear from you, I will see you next week.